I'm Allie Iberle, the Shrimp Fishery Management Plan Lead for the Council. I'm also joined by Kathleen Howington, the Habitat and Ecosystem Plan Lead. Thank you so much for joining the public hearings tonight for Coral Amendment 11 and Shrimp Amendment 12. So how did we get to where we are today with the joint Coral Amendment 11, Shrimp Amendment 12? This amendment is in response to comments from the rock shrimp fishermen petitioning for access to historically important fishing grounds that were closed during Coral Amendment 8. The council did attempt to open this area they identified through a shrimp fishery access area in Coral Amendment 10, but ultimately the amendment was disapproved because it did not adequately demonstrate how essential fish habitat would be protected, and it didn't give information on possible bycatch within the shrimp fishery access area. By creating a joint amendment between both the coral and shrimp fishery management plans, the council hopes to address the following reasons that Coral 10 was disapproved. So we're going to be incorporating economic information, incorporating available information on bycatch and sedimentation, and then addressing the recent Executive Order 14276, restoring American seafood competitiveness and how it applies to the rock shrimp fishery. To expand on the background that I just went over, I'm going to go over a couple key milestones that kind of got us to where we are today. So in December of 2014, when finalizing Coral Amendment 8, the council received those comments I mentioned from rock shrimp fishermen about an area of the proposed northern extension of the OHAPSI that was economically important for the rock shrimp fishery. In March of 2014, the Deepwater Shrimp AP brought new coordinates, and those were presented to the council. In response to that, in June of 2015, the council began development on Coral Amendment 10. And then in July of 2015, Coral Amendment 8, which expanded that northern boundary of the OHAPSI, was implemented. June of 2018, the council received feedback from both the coral and shrimp APs on Coral Amendment 10. And then March of 2019, development of Coral 10 was paused, and then in September of 2020, they began to move forward with development of that amendment. And then finally, in December of 2021, Coral Amendment 10 was formally submitted to the Department of Commerce. So after the council submitted Coral Amendment 10, in July of 2022, they received formal notice that it was disapproved. In December of 2023, the council made a motion to start the resubmission of Coral Amendment 10. We kind of pivoted in June of 2024. The council had a lot of discussion and how to move forward with this, and ultimately made a motion to develop a joint amendment between both the shrimp and coral fishery management plans to accomplish the goal of opening this shrimp fishery access area. And then at the most recent meeting in June of 2025, so this year, the council selected a preferred alternative and approved the draft amendment for public hearings. And so that's kind of getting us to where we are this summer of 2025 conducting these public hearings, but some upcoming milestones. So the next council meeting in September of 2025, the council will review your public hearing comments and an updated draft amendment. In December of 2025, the council will review a final draft amendment and tentatively consider the amendment for formal review. And then again, we are anticipating the amendment being submitted to the Department of Commerce early 2026. Now for the actions and alternatives for joint Coral Amendment 11 and Shrimp Amendment 12. This amendment only contains one action. That's to establish a shrimp fishery access area along the eastern edge of the northern extension of the Aculina Bank habitat area of particular concern. Alternative 1, no action, would not establish a shrimp fishery access area within the Aculina Bank habitat area of particular concern. And you can see on the right-hand side of your screen the entire OHAPSI displayed there. Preferred alternative 2 would establish a shrimp fishery access area along the eastern edge of the northern extension of the OHAPSI that is approximately 16.61 square nautical miles. In this shrimp fishery access area, A shrimp vessel with a valid South Atlantic commercial or rock shrimp permit could trawl for rock shrimp within the area established by the coordinates, which are shown on your screen along with the proposed shrimp fishery access area. The square nautical miles are approximate because this differs when you're calculating it with different mapping programs. We included it because it helps to kind of compare this alternative and the next alternative, but the end all be all for the location and the size of the shrimp fishery access area in this alternative and the next is going to be the coordinates. And then finally, we have alternative 3, which would also establish a shrimp fishery access area along the eastern edge of the OHAPC. This one would be slightly larger at approximately 24.16 square nautical miles. And again, you're going to see a slightly different set of coordinates here that indicate that larger area. And then the same thing would apply for this shrimp fishery access area. A shrimp vessel with a valid South Atlantic commercial rock shrimp permit would be allowed to trawl for rock shrimp within this shrimp fishery access area. I wanted to go over some recent discussion that is pertinent to the alternatives that we just reviewed. So during the most recent council meeting in June 2025, the council reviewed the results of a mapping study using the NOAA ship Nancy Foster that was completed in April of 2025. The results of this mapping expedition supported some previous studies in the area, which noted that there were no standing live coral, dead coral, coral rubble, or suitable habitat for coral within the area of the proposed shrimp fishery access area. And then for more details on that mapping expedition and to look at some of the older ones, all of that information is included in your draft amendment that's in this briefing book. The other thing I wanted to note was that rock shrimp vessels are currently required to carry a vessel monitoring system or VMS. And this alerts law enforcement to their location to ensure that they're not trawling within the OHAPC currently. So this is already going on. And rock shrimp fishermen, have also noted during both public comments and AP meetings that they follow a self-imposed buffer of about a quarter mile to ensure that they remain outside of current closed areas, and that this was happening when the area was open to shrimping. And the council may also retain transit requirements for vessels transiting through the OHAPC. And I'm going to get into a little more details on this transit provision in the next couple slides. But in addition to requesting the public's feedback on the creation of the shrimp fishery access area, the council also wants to know some more information from people about this VMS transmission rate within the shrimp fishery access area, where, if it's established, the rock shrimp vessels would be shrimping and not transiting. But again, we'll get into that in a little more detail in the next couple slides. So a little bit more information on that transit provision and then kind of how it ties into this proposed shrimp fishery access area. So because rock shrimp fishermen were transiting across the OHAPC to reach fishing grounds, Coral Amendment 8 implemented a transit provision to try to help ensure that the coral weren't being damaged as boats moved over this closed area. The transit provision currently increases the VMS transmission rate, so that's that vessel monitoring system, from 1 ping or communication per hour to 1 ping per 5 minutes when a vessel enters the OHAPC. The increased transmission rate ensures that a vessel is maintaining or moving at the required speed of 5 knots or more through the OHAPC. So these shrimp vessels can't trawl at a speed of 5 knots. So that speed just ensures that the vessel is indeed transiting and not trawling. And then obviously a vessel must also have their gear stowed while transiting. So we put together kind of a really simplified image to help show how the transit provision may kind of be in play with the proposed shrimp fishery access area. So on the left hand, we have a really simplified, obviously not to scale, OHAPC rectangle in red. So outside of that rectangle, rock shrimp vessels must maintain a 1 ping or VMS communication per hour, and their speed is not monitored. However, as soon as the vessel enters that red box, they must increase their ping rate to 1 ping again or VMS communication per 5 minutes. They must stow their gear, and the vessel must maintain that 5-knot transit speed. But what happens when we incorporate a shrimp fishery access area? So if you, again, not to scale, but if you're insetting a shrimp fishery access area within that greater OHAPC rectangle, the council obviously is not removing the transit provision within the rest of the OHAPC, so still have an increased ping rate of 1 ping per 5 minutes, gear is stowed, and vessel is maintaining a 5-knot speed. However, in the shrimp fishery access area, uh, if established, vessels would now be able to shrimp here, but the council has been discussing maintaining that increased ping rate of 1 ping or VMS communication per 5 minutes. However, obviously speed will not be monitored and gear would not have to be stored because they would be allowed to shrimp in this area. So some things to think about regarding that. So maintaining an increased ping rate while shrimping will be an increased cost because obviously the vessel will be moving through the area much slower. There's not an increased ping rate in any other shrimp fishery access area. However, this is kind of a unique situation because of the transit nature of vessels moving across the OHAPC to get to fishing grounds. And then maintaining a higher ping rate would provide more resolution for vessels using that area and would aid in enforcement. So in thinking about that increased cost that I mentioned, the planning team for this amendment will be putting together some more information for the council to consider for their September meeting. But some quick bullets to think about before we kind of pose some questions for you guys to think about as you give your comments. So if the transit ping or communication rate is required during fishing activities within that shrimp fishery access area, then there would be an increase from 1 ping per hour, which is what is required of vessels not in the area, to 12 pings per hour. And when we looked at it kind of really quickly, the transmission cost seemed nominal. However, we want to pose some questions to the public. So specifically for rock shrimp fishermen, the council would like to know how maintaining that current ping rate or communication rate would affect your use of the shrimp fishery access area. And then for others, do you feel that maintaining a current ping rate is a positive, that increased ping rate is a positive trade-off to establishing a shrimp fishery access area? And so keep those questions in mind as when we turn it over for public comment. So the last thing I want to review before pausing for clarifying questions are the summary of effects. So any biological effects on both shrimp and coral, economic effects, social effects, and any administrative effects. So we'll start with biological. Preferred Alternative 2 and Alternative 3 would allow rock shrimp harvest within that proposed shrimp fishery access area. However, use of the area is expected to be limited due to the shrimp fishery's sporadic usage of the area. The strength of the currents in this area only allows skilled shrimpers to utilize the area, so substantial biological effects on the rock shrimp stock is not expected. This stock, specifically rock shrimp, overfishing is tracked by comparing landings to the maximum sustainable yield defined for this fishery, ensuring that harvest remains within sustainable levels. There could be negative biological impacts to Oculina coral under Preferred Alternative 2 and Alternative 3 as compared to no action, not establishing a shrimp fishery access area, due to sediment plumes resulting from trawling activity and gear damage to existing coral if vessels do not abide by the coordinates of the shrimp fishery access area. However, these effects are unlikely to be realized as water currents tend to move in the direction that would carry sediment away from known coral locations, and the VMS requirement ensures that vessels remain outside of the protected area. There is a slight possibility for bycatch of snapper grouper species. However, rock shrimp gear, regardless of the number of nets, each net must contain both a turtle excluder device or TED and a bycatch reduction device or bird on each net. That brings us to economic effects. There is expected to be a positive economic effect for preferred alternative 2 and alternative 3 compared to alternative 1 no action, as these alternatives would allow for rock shrimp fishermen to harvest rock shrimp in an area they would otherwise not be allowed to. Preferred alternative 2 and 3 would contribute to the rock shrimp fishery reaching its optimum yield, which the fishery has not been achieving in recent years. Preferred alternative 2 and 3 would also align with the recent Executive Order 14276 restoring American seafood competitiveness by unburdening commercial fishing operations. So for social effects, preferred alternative 2 and alternative 3 would provide social benefit for the rock shrimp industry as it would maximize profit by providing access to historic fishing grounds. Preferred alternative 2 has a slightly more social benefit for the rock shrimp industry as it aligns with coordinates that rock shrimp fishermen have been recommending since March of 2013. However, there could be negative social impacts if Oculina coral is negatively impacted by the use of the shrimp fishery access area. And the final summary of effects are administrative. So preferred alternative 2 and alternative 3 would increase the administrative burden as there would need to be enforcement within the shrimp fishery access area. However, this burden is expected to be minimal because of the following. Rock shrimp vessels already are required to be equipped with VMS. Vessels must already abide by a strict transit provision that is monitored by enforcement, and the Council has proposed maintaining the transit provision VMS communication rate within the shrimp fishery access area if established, which would give enforcement more resolution on vessel position.